Hello and welcome to Piece of Pod, a podcast brought to you by South Coast law firm Warner Goodman. I'm Sarah Whitemore. I'm an employment lawyer and senior partner in the firm with over 30 years of experience. In this podcast, I'll be having conversations with law firm partners, business owners, clients and other contacts of mine, and we'll be engaging in conversations about running businesses, career journeys, and how to excel in the world of work. So if that's of interest, why not grab yourself a cuppa, get yourself comfortable, and let's dive in. So I'm joined today by Lee Peck from Lee Peck Media Limited. Lee is one of my China chums. They're a group of businessmen and women, mostly from the south of England, who all met on a trip to China nearly 20 years ago, I think now, Lee.
Astonishing, yeah.
We were there to discuss business strategy and we came from all sorts of different backgrounds. There were a fireplace importer and a contact lens manufacturer and a phone recycler and
a lawyer and accountant, yeah.
And from then, over the last 20 years, we've done quite a lot of work together.
Yeah.
Within the China Chums and just mutually. I've helped you, you've helped me.
Sure.
And we've also helped clients together.
Yeah.
So I'm delighted that you've agreed to come and chat with me today.
Absolute pleasure. Could hardly resist, Sarah.
I'm sure. So let's start at the very beginning, as they say, a very good place to start. Can you tell us about your career journey? Where did you start? What did you do when you first left school?
Okay. I'm going to go back even further than that. Aged about 10, in my council house in Scarborough, and if my wife was here, she'd roll her eyes at that. Not that I wear my council house background with any pride or shame, really. It is a fact, but it nevertheless makes the journey longer. And I was sitting in my council house in Scarborough thinking, how can I be rich without working for it? That was my starting point. And I remember watching a detective series called 77 Sunset Strip with the wonderfully named Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. And I was looking outside my window in my council house and thinking, this is bleak. And then I looked at the glamour of a black and white detective story from Hollywood on my 14-inch TV screen and thought, how can I get to Hollywood? And do you know what? 30 years later, I got to Hollywood. Oh. But the journey then started with me looking and thinking, how can I get on television as a first step? So I guess it all started with me. I went for an audition at RADA, Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, which I failed, won't surprise anybody. And then I thought, how do I get on TV? So I entered talent contests and I became the North Yorkshire Boys champion at public speaking. All from really research, no internet then, research in libraries. And eventually I became a journalist. On the equivalent of the Hampshire Chronicle round here, the Weatherby News, just outside Leeds, and then in radio and then in television. So I got my break in TV 1981 down here in Southampton. That's what brought me here. And again, these are all interesting branding lessons. I was offered with TVS, Television South, who took over from Southern Television. As they say, your older listeners will remember that.
And me.
And you. But I was offered a job in Maidstone or Southampton. This is 1979. Saints had just won the Cup 3 years earlier. I'm afraid to say, I hadn't heard of Maidstone.
Okay.
But I'd heard of Southampton through the football, through the Saints. And we, as employers, are always looking for talent. And if indeed I dare wear the badge of talent, it was the Saints that brought me to Southampton and to television.
So interesting. One of my later questions was going to be about your connection with Southampton, because you're known for promoting Southampton Football Club, the University of Southampton. You're involved in Southampton's bid for
City of Culture.
City of Culture, the Southampton Marathon, all of these things that have the word Southampton, you're very much connected to, and yet I was aware that Scarborough was home. So having chosen Southampton over Maidstone, it resonated in some way? You decided that was the one? For you?
Yeah. I mean, I came here from Nottingham, which was a big, vibrant city. And I like cities. You might call it a pastime. I'm always fascinated to see cities and what makes them work. My boy lives in San Francisco, my eldest boy.
Very different city.
Very different city. My younger boy lives in Berlin. And another different city. So cities fascinate me. I did look at Maidstone in the library and, saw it had a jail in the city centre and thought, okay. But I chose Southampton, and I see myself very much as an adopted son of Southampton. My 4 kids are brought up here. I'm married locally, of course, and that marriage 20 years ago, ancient history, that ended, as things do. Remarried. So Southampton is very much, home now, very much home. And I was keen to promote it. I've always been very keen to promote this city for a variety of reasons. I love the people here. I think it's worthy of promotion. There's some naysayers about Southampton, but with the City of Culture, which I did, by the way, pro bono in your language, for free, because I just wanted to propel Southampton.
And pro bono gives you that sense of giving something back, doesn't it? If you feel that Southampton has adopted you and you've adopted it, to give something back in that way.
And do you know what? In business, you're not an island, are you? I think you don't have to, but I think it's great to be part of the community. I think it's good business sense. And I think giving back is important.
I recently went to a networking event where...
I read about that, yeah.
There was a promotion of local beers. There was a craft brewer. Yeah. And the brewer was talking about his beers, but also talking about Southampton. And so I'm not actually born in Southampton, but I came here at about 18 months old. So I've been here 50-odd years. Yeah. And the things he was talking about, I just didn't know. I didn't know that the city centre was called Kimber's Chimney. That it was all to do with the mayor and that it was the highest point in Southampton at one stage. That there was a knight called Beavis who went around, all around the world, and it is known in other parts. Well, I've just always thought Beavis Valley, what's that named after? So you can live somewhere and not really embrace it in quite that way.
And do you know what? That's true. We often perhaps know more about London than we do about our, I nearly said hometown, but for the purposes of this, let's have a bit of license. I work well having a bit of license. The etymology of Southampton's fascinating. And for many people, of course, begins with Titanic.
Yes.
That's where, it's the international byword for Southampton. And it's, we were fortunate enough. You mentioned the Southampton connection. Well, we worked on the 100th commemorative events for Titanic sailing from Southampton in the docks, and we got 140 different media outlets into Southampton, and it went all around the world. And when the ship left, I believe April the 12th. 1912, I think it's April the 12th, and at midday we had a sound of the original Titanic whistle signifying that, and that was both chilling and very emotional.
Yeah, there can't be any survivors left, I shouldn't think, of the Titanic now, but there were a lot who lived in the city, weren't there?
Yeah, have you been to the Sea City Museum?
I have, yes.
Which we also launched.
Oh, okay.
As a matter of interest. And we talk about PR perhaps being slightly ephemeral, slightly spiritual, slightly difficult to grasp. But we did the logo for Sea City Museum. And there aren't many times as an agency that quite literally your logo is in granite.
Yes.
Well, it is there.
Yeah.
Or concrete.
And very much opposite the BBC studios there, isn't it? So, which brings us back to TV. And of course, we can't talk about your career without talking about Game for a Laugh.
No.
Are you Game for a Laugh?
Yeah, I am. And it's quite interesting, that that has become a saying. Are you game for a laugh? Yeah, and of course it originated from the show that I was on. I was on TVS at the time, and I was spotted by London Weekend Television, a producer called Alan Boyd, who gave Simon Cowell his first break with the X Factor. There was a predecessor to the X Factor which escapes me, but Alan Boyd also invented the Generation Game with Bruce Forsyth.
Okay.
So he spotted me, and little did I know, but I was being watched on TV for some weeks before they called me up and said, we want to make you an offer to go and Game for a Laugh. And what was interesting from the process, it's interesting being very famous. And I was very famous for probably 2 years.
Right.
Even walking in London, people would stop me. And the first thing Alan said was, bear in mind, I wasn't a young guy, particularly. I was probably 28. And he said, any skeletons in the cupboard? And I said, well, I've been married and stuff. He said, well, so have we all type of thing. He said, but any scandals we should know about, because when the first show goes out, they'll be digging for scandal on you. Mm. He said, and we might as well know it now, because if it's too bad, you won't get the job. But if it's something we think we can cope with, then you need to cope with it too. And of course, 1981, Sunday night, 7:30, January the 13th-ish, 22 million people watched Game for a Laugh.
Because everyone sat around, there were only the 3 channels, and everyone sat around the same programme together. Yeah. And it was live. You
again,
recorded,
live.
but I mean, it was broadcast live, and you didn't get a chance to see it again tomorrow or later or whatever.
And that was it.
Take it now or don't.
It was what they call event TV.
Right.
Strictly will have 8 million. Mm. And look how famous that is. So when there's 22 million, I lived in Canton Street then, in Southampton, and people, youngsters, were camping outside their house.
Right.
It was astonishing.
So I have to ask you, you said, were there any skeletons in the cupboard? Were there any skeletons in the cupboard?
Only dead ones. No, there weren't actually. No, there really wasn't. I mean, true confession time. I got married to a northern girl, Karen, and it only lasted 15 months. It was a huge mistake. I should never have done it. That was the only skeleton.
And of course, back then, skeletons were in cupboards, and it was harder to dig in. I mean, these days, these things come to the fore quite rapidly because of the whole social media world that we live in. And
of course, skeletons now are used strategically, where, the skeleton is often kept in the cupboard. And I'm thinking now of the dressage rider, her incident, and best not to comment on that, but that was filmed 4 years ago and strategically released 4 days before the Olympics.
Yes.
And that, of course, is often where people like me come in, who manage reputations. And that is a large part of my work, just making sure that when it gets tricky, people are manage that process properly.
So PR and crisis management, this is where we've worked together on, with some of our clients and mutual clients.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's come about because a letter's popped through the post saying, by the way, we've recorded a programme and we're going to go out and this is the transcript. What do you think? Have you got a statement to say? And sometimes it's just a fear that might come because that there is something that could be of interest to the press. And we've then had conversations with clients, mutual clients, on those sorts of topics. What's your general sort of advice to businesses who are worried about those skeletons or have been alerted to skeletons?
Yeah, or indeed, they're not real skeletons. Often when you properly research situations, things aren't as bad or aren't quite right. For instance, we've had occasions where we've actually rung the journalist up, I'm an ex-journalist, So that's an advantage. I speak their language. And of course, journalists, broadcasters, see news as a product. Mm-hmm. And they have time to fill. Yeah. And I don't mean that as in filling time for its own sake, but they have, you know, when the news comes on at 6 o'clock, you can't have 10 minutes of blackness. You know, you need to fill it, the space. But sometimes there isn't really a story there, or, you know, sometimes we sort of say, these are the facts. Do you still think it's worth publishing? And sometimes they do, and that's their prerogative. And sometimes we can persuade them not to. But one thing I should make clear, Sarah, is that I'm such, as you might expect, a big advocate for the free press. You know, citizen journalism, so-called, where an untrained person can take video and publish it as the truth without verifying the source from 3 different avenues, is dangerous. Yeah. It will slant things, and it will give an incorrect bias. Now, I'm leaving myself wide open here because I think the media has sometimes the media itself is under attack. You know, you've had the phone hacking and all that. But I hold journalists, because I'm one, in the highest of regard. And, you know, my job as a PR guy is simply to present the best of our clients.
And it's interesting because there's something that I talk about with my clients a lot when we're dealing with disciplinaries and grievances, actually. And it's an advertising campaign, I would say probably 20, 30, I don't know, years ago. I think it was for a newspaper. And there was a chap walking along the street. I would describe him as a skinhead. He's walking along the street behind an old lady, and he goes to attack her. And at the time, everyone's like, oh, he's mugging her. And then the camera flips round and you see the other view, and there's some brickwork falling off the top of a scaffolding. He's actually saving her. And so I talk with my clients about disciplinaries and grievances and say, look, you are only seeing one side of the story here. You've got to flip the camera around and have a look at both sides. You may still see him mugging the old lady, or you may see he's saving the lady from the brickwork falling. And I guess what you're doing with your PR and crisis management is trying to flip the story if it's possible, so that, you know, there's a true light shown for the client's benefit.
Yeah, I think so. And of course, that there is no doubt. I tell this story, I think it's apocryphal in the sense of it may be made up. However, I believe in San Francisco, many years ago, they brought out a newspaper called Good News, and it lasted a week. People like bad news. People, you know, that's the headline. But what you're talking about was also, more recently, a Guardian advert to promote the Guardian newspaper. So it had, you know, the small focus of a picture, of an image, where it looked as if they were fighting.
Right.
Yeah? And then it blew that up next to it. So you had the tiny little bit here, and then the bigger image here, where, if you like, the guy was helping the woman saving her from bricks. And the headline was, "The Guardian gives you the full picture."
Right.
Which I always thought was brilliant.
Same sort of thing. Same sort of thing.
Yeah, same sort of thing.
And the old adage, you know, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, which, you know, is that with the journalists? Are you into keeping your journalists close?
Oh, yeah. And I don't regard them as the enemy, by the way. Hostile witnesses sometimes, to use your parlance. But, yeah, you know, you've there's a lot of mutual trust, actually. A lot of mutual trust, you know, where for instance, I drive an electric car. I'm very proud of driving an EV. One of our clients happens to be Instavolt, which is provides rapid chargers. Mm-hmm. And even though I'm sort of evangelical about driving an EV, if I'm promoting Instavolt, I will say, I drive an EV. I'm all the rest. You know, I'm really taken by this, and I think it's fabulous benefits. But I've got to declare an interest, as you will.
Yeah.
You know, to sort of say, but this story is about Instavolt, and yes, they are a client.
Yeah.
So you've got to come clean, because guess what? You found out very quickly anyway.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then it just looks bad. So
And then,
you may as well.
then you've lost credibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all we have, I think, as professionals is our reputation.
Yeah, yeah. So I talked at the beginning, the introduction, about the China chums and meeting you through networking, and you're big into networking.
I am big into networking.
I've heard you say that you built your business or you built your career on networking.
Yeah, I think so.
We have a lot of people that we've connected with through networking circles, but we also have a lot of employees who are lacking in confidence. Do you have any sort of guidance for them on what the benefits of networking are, or how to approach it in an effective way?
Yeah, I did something for Business South, of which we're both very familiar. I did a networking event out in the New Forest at a microbrewery. And loads of younger professionals came out. And of course, it's quite interesting. And I always think of a risk assessment. You know, when you are holding an event, you've got to do a risk assessment. You've then got to walk it through and think in your head, you know, what are the risks? Because quite obviously you wouldn't walk under a ladder, certainly if you're superstitious, stuff like that. Yeah. And so it is with networking. I'm thinking, you know, wow, it's something that has been just drilled into me that I do naturally, and I've done it forever. How does it work? So I had to actually think hard about it. And of course, you start networking at school, don't you? You get your little group of friends and, you know, their dad's a mechanic, your scooter breaks down, so you talk to Susie and say, you know, could your dad fix my scooter? Well, that's networking. Yeah? And so it is in business. I always remember a great, you know this guy, and we'll mention him, Andrew Chalkley. And Nick Parker.
Another lawyer.
Another lawyer, yeah, and Nick the accountant. Well, many years ago, and again, this will make you laugh, but I set out on February the 4th, 1988. That's when I started Lee Peck Media. And on day one, I had a thing called Yellow Pages. You'll remember it. Yeah. Younger people might think, what was Yellow Pages? But do they have yellow.com now? I don't know. But basically, it was a directory, wasn't it? And it was, I'm now doing this, 4 inches thick.
My mother-in-law used to use it to kill spiders. It was just
right.
Boom.
Well, I knew a few people who stood on it to reach the top wardrobe, the drawer. And I set out on my adventure, my business adventure, having been in TV and stuff. And I started on ACE, accountants. And I rang up accountants in Southampton.
Okay.
Until eventually, A, somebody asked, and B, they invited me in. And Nick Parker worked for Weeks Green.
Yeah.
So
you got as far as W.
So I got as far as W before anybody responded.
Oh my goodness. And
again, that's something else relevant to networking. You've got to be tenacious. Yeah. You can't expect instant results. So I met Nick and, he signed us up and we worked together for many, many years, as you know. And one particular day, and this throws in corporate hospitality with networking. And Nick said, I'm going to Cheltenham, this is 500 years ago. A guy called Andrew Chalkley is joining us. So I, again, Hepburn, Winstanley and Pugh, now a distant memory. And so I said, yeah, I'll go. So second thing is say yes.
Interesting thing, you mentioned Hepburn, Winstanley and Pugh. One of the, I don't know if it's apocryphal tales, but certainly one of the tales that lawyers tell in Southampton is about B&Q and the Sunday trading legislation.
I was involved in that.
Which was massive, wasn't it? A massive change in our entire culture as a country that suddenly shops would open on Sundays. There'll be a generation of people out there who can't believe they ever didn't. But rumour has it that one day on a Saturday, It was B&Q were a Mr. Block and Mr. Quayle, I think, if I'm right.
Yeah, from Portswood.
From Portswood, rang up or walked through the door of Hepburn, Stanley and Pugh and said, can you sort us out a lease for this property we want in Portswood? And the lawyer opened the door, let them in, dealt with the lease, and from there it grew and grew, and they became B&Q, and they did the Sunday trading cases and so on, and would have been big business for that lawyer. But being open and available, and as you say, saying yes, and seeing those little people as actually potentials to be the big people was a fundamental part of that. Don't know if it's a true story, but I like to think it was.
Well, again, I would not dispute it. It seems highly likely to me because in the 70s and 80s, it was like that, wasn't it? So I went to Cheltenham because Nick invited me. We all got on brilliantly. And I remember I'd actually crashed my car that morning, and I rang Nick and I said, I can't go, I've crashed the car. He said, so what are you going to do today that'll prevent you going? I said, well, I've got to sort the car out. He said, you can sort the car out tomorrow. Come and have a nice day out. So that's another thing. Be positive. Yeah. Be confident. So I went to Cheltenham, and all three of us got on brilliantly. There's some other people there. And Andrew gave me a lift home that night. And I have to say, all day I'd actually, and that's the other thing really, Sarah, I'd forgotten about the networking thing. I was just having a great day. Andrew was a lovely guy. Anyway, he dropped me home, right? And he said, your car's, broken, whatever. And I'm driving then, and I'm thinking, and I might have told him this, it was a bit like a first date. I'm thinking, well, I've lost my opportunity to ask him out, does he want a PR outfit? And as I'm getting out of the car, I said, Lee, he said, before you go, he said, I've seen what you do for Nick. He said, could you do the same for us?
Yeah.
And I said,
and that
fantastic.
was the start of the Three Stooges.
And that was the start.
Thick as thieves, flying to Jersey for lunch and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And maybe if our youngsters go out networking, they might end up flying to Jersey too.
Yeah. The other thing is, treat everybody the same. So even I'm still nervous about networking, going into a room with not knowing many people. But, and I've walked out on a few places where there's been no entry. People, I've been stood on the outside of a little group and nobody said hello or whatever, or gone to the buffet and nice sausage rolls and somebody's looked at me oddly, but I think be bold, be friendly, be interested, ask them questions, and hope that they're going to ask you questions. And of course, the other key to all this is find some common ground, and get a conversation going. But don't expect results quickly. It's a long game, and be available. And do you know what? Somebody said to me a long time ago, which I think is a good idea, and it's easy to do when it's your own business, but adopt clients. Right. So I will sometimes, if it's not too much trouble to me, and I don't mean that in any other way that, we've got to earn money, so you can't do favours all the time. But sometimes I've actually, spotted an opportunity and rung you up and said, you know what, they're looking for an interview on the so-and-so. And it's like, well, how much is it? And it's like, look, Radio Soul, they'll be really interested in what you're doing. And they get a free spot on the radio. Hopefully the thing leaves all right. And then the next time they've got something that we can perhaps offer professionally, then that's it.
And I think that's often the case, isn't it? That you need to be focusing on how you can help other people or who you can put in touch with somebody else to help them. Yeah. Not necessarily, can I get a deal out of this? Is there a job for me? And is there some money? No. The other thing I think is interesting is if I go back to Sarah Whitemore, age, I don't know, about 15, kind of stroppy teenage years, we used to go to places with my mum and she knew everybody. And she'd been a teacher, so she had either taught them, she knew the parents of the people, she was also big in the church. She knew everybody from the church. She had all these connections. You think, for goodness sake, we can't go anywhere without someone speaking to her. Now, 30 years into business, I find myself in the same situation. I go to lots of places and people know me, but you have to start 30 years ago. You have to. It's a lifetime thing, isn't it? You acquire people and you develop your connections with them and work out which ones can benefit which. And sometimes people sit lurking in your network for many, many years with nothing happening, and then suddenly they have a need and they come and you've been on LinkedIn with them some time ago. And,
that's it. And, you can call it networking, or you can call it friendship groups. The truth of it is, and I think this is a very real thing. I do think you can have friends and acquaintances and people you get on with really well in business. Now, they might not overlap into your social sphere, but there's nothing wrong with having, you've got your family, you've got your social sphere, and you've got your business life. And I've got you and I have known each other a long, long time. And we've had our moments together, in the sense of you've confided in me certain things and vice versa. But we've never been out even for a coffee, or we might have had a coffee, but we've been to various things, not least China and stuff. But, your business contacts are not to be underestimated as a source of sustenance or friendship. And longevity.
Yeah. And I think you and I hopefully have both got into the same sort of position with our clients and each other, which is this trusted advisor piece. You sort of mentioned there about confiding in one another. As you know, I was diagnosed with breast cancer earlier in the year. First person I rang was actually you, because I thought, this guy knows. I wanted to know, who should I tell? Well, I say first person I rang, obviously told the family.
Of course.
Let's not ignore that bit. But after the family knew, who should I tell? Should I tell work? Should I not tell work? Should I tell clients? Should I not tell clients? And just having the ability to sort of chew the fat was hugely valuable for me. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I did take your advice at the time, didn't tell many people. Later on, put it all over LinkedIn, as you do. But, it was good to have that sounding board there.
And again, I was deeply touched by that because, for a female particularly, it's a very sensitive subject. I'm fortunate in that I've got 2 grown-up daughters. You certainly know one of them. So I was brought up by women. My dad left when I was 2. So my mum and my grands brought me up. So my daughters call me an honorary female. Okay. Yeah. I don't know whether I quite go as far as being a feminist, but, so I'm very comfortable with those conversations. But again, that is a sign, isn't it, of, that trust. And of course, it doesn't come cheaply, does it? It's years.
It's earned. Yeah.
And it's earned. Yeah.
So you mentioned your mum and your gran, people who brought you up. Did they give you any advice in the youngster years that led into your business?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting. You find me here now. My mum died 2 days ago. 94 and a half.
Goodness me, what an age.
Yeah, what an age. Now, the truth of it is, with older people, this is my truth. Just to give the underwritten sort of thing, this is my truth. 94 and a half, a little bit of dementia. She got to 90 pretty much compos mentis, physically okay. The last 4 years haven't been great. She still lives in Scarborough with my stepdad, who's been great. My brother looked after her. But 94, all the cliches come into mind, sweet release and all the rest of it. So I'm actually okay. Yeah?
I'm glad to hear it.
I'm actually okay. But of course, it does make you reflective, and you just saying, what did they tell me? What lessons did I learn from those, tough northern females? Pretty straightforward. They were always honest. They confused honesty sometimes with a lack of tact.
Right.
Yeah. And I think they've taught me that. I think, actually, look at that. I've got to it fairly quickly. I think their lack of tact taught me tact.
Right.
Yeah. I remember my nan was just brutal, My mum would come in and says, what do you think of this, mum? Blah, blah, blah. She says, it's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Oh, and of course, my mum would be just crestfallen. They'd have her around, wouldn't talk for 2 days. And I used to observe her this and think, that's not a great way. And I think that's probably led me into PR because, you know, I do see myself as a diplomat. I mean, I can put my foot in it as well as the next person, can't we all? But yeah, they probably taught me that inadvertently.
It's interesting. So my mum has dementia and significantly so, has had for a number of years now. She's a northern woman. She's from Preston in Lancashire, so northern. And the lack of tact is the one thing that seems to have survived her dementia. So we had a recent meeting with her dementia team and doctors and so on. And they were diagnosing and advising and she sat in the corner saying, blah, blah, blah. All she could think was these people are going on and on and on, and she wasn't afraid to express it. But there you go. It's one of those things that comes with age.
I think so. But I also saw a lot of kindness with them. And I think good humour and kindness will take you a long way.
And what about in the other direction? What advice have you passed on to your children? What do you think their legacy
the biggest advice I gave them at about 14 or 15 was it's all downhill from here.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I said, look, you think this is tough, you know, going to secondary school. I said, but enjoy it, because very soon you're going to have to earn a living. The probability is you're going to have to work for 50 years. Yeah. The probability is you will get in jobs that you don't really like. I said, so be resilient. Yeah. I read in you know, when I got divorced, that all things pass. You may be familiar with that.
Yes.
So the good and the bad pass.
Yes.
So I said, be patient when it's bad and be present when it's good.
Yeah.
So, you know, and contribute. I think we have a duty to contribute. And I think we have a duty to help others too. And I'm not saying that in a hugely, isn't it wonderful type of way, but I think you've got an obligation, certainly in our environment, and I guess I'm broadly talking about the West, because my big thing in a way is, by dint of the fact that we've been born in the UK, again, I'm talking broadly, as opposed to a war zone, and let's just leave it at that. You know, just by dint of that, of being fortunate, our lives are so much easier. So I think we should and are obliged to dive in and help while we can. Now, whether that's for, you know, Heartbeat, a charity I'm very close to, or whether it's cancer or dementia charity, I think you should try and do what you can.
Yeah. Very sound advice, very sound advice. Yeah. Now, you and I have something in common, and I'm not sure if you'll reflect on this, but your Frankie, your daughter, works for you, and my daughter Connie works for us. My daughter Connie's sitting across the table filming us this morning. But Frankie's recently joined you. How are you finding that? Yeah,
interesting. I don't know about Connie, who I can see sitting there, but Frankie's hilarious. You know, you should join from the BBC. So I never saw my business as a family business. Uh-huh. So, you know, eventually, you know, we got together and she joined. But what she tickles me mostly with is the fact that I'll say, oh, Frankie, what about, you know, you couldn't just do that. She's, I'm busy, Dad.
Okay.
Yeah. Whereas somebody who wasn't related to me would just say, I'll do it, or I'll do it in 5 minutes. Frankie just about challenges me on everything. And it's hilarious.
They sound very similar, and Connie won't be surprised for me saying this, but we had a similar sort of start to our working life together.
You know, when it became apparent she was joining us, a few of my, you know, very close clients and sort of said, you know, will she call you Dad in meetings?
Right.
And I said, no, because she calls me Lee at home.
Oh, right.
And she said that they sort of said, really? I said, yeah. My two daughters, Alex and Frankie, 2 years between them both, when at home, when they were 3 and 4, they obviously learned my name was Lee, and to tease me, called me Lee instead of Dad.
Yeah.
And that stuck. So it's more unusual for Frankie to call me Dad. So we're in meetings, you know, and of course she she will heighten that as well. Lee, will you do this? Or Lee, will you do that? And of course, my clients think that's a business-like reaction to her joining. But no, it's perfectly natural.
So we have a similar sort of situation. So Connie does call me mum. She'll refer to me as mum when she's talking to other colleagues. I struggle with emails. So signing off an email, if it's an email to Connie and say Kat and Kath and whoever, I would always sign it off as Sarah. If I'm signing it off and it's just an email from me to her, that's when I kind of go, oh, should it say mum? Should it have an X alongside of it?
Yeah.
It's an
and again,
interesting one.
I take that as it strikes me with the mood I'm in. Sometimes I'll say, hi, Frank, one of our clients is Barrett. Have you done this for Barrett? Pa.
Okay.
Yeah? Sometimes a kiss, not a kiss. And the more I think about it, wow, it's interesting, isn't it? Because all this thing is just sort of reactive and instinctive. I either sign off Pa or not at all.
Right.
I don't think I sign off Lee.
Right. Interesting.
As a matter of interest.
Yesterday I was listening to a new podcast, which is a conversation between Martin Kemp from Spandau and his son Roman Kemp.
Yeah.
And they cover all sorts, it's called FFS, My Dad's Martin Kemp.
Yeah.
And they cover all sorts of topics, funerals, marriages, parenting, all sorts of things. Yesterday when I was listening to it, they were talking about how Roman has had to live his whole life as the son of Martin Kemp. Sure. Whatever he does, it's always Roman Kemp, capital radio DJ, son of Martin Kemp.
Yeah.
And he said to Martin, do you think that it affected, me or you or going up? And they started to talk about these things called Nepo kids.
Yeah.
Which I guess our girls are Nepo kids, aren't they? Yeah. And Martin was saying, I say Martin as if I know him, Martin Kemp was saying, well, I think my name opened the door, but you had to walk through that door and deliver, because if you didn't, that door would be slammed in your face. And I think that's very similar for myself and Connie, and presumably yourself and Frankie. Yeah. Connie's come in, she's applied because she knew of the job because of me, but having got the job, she's got to deliver, and the name doesn't get her any progress really once she's through the door.
Yeah. If I can, one of the I'm taking this as sort of an adult show, and don't panic. I can see the glazed area, but I always smiled, and it's a different thing. But basic index, Sharon Stone, she says you can't sleep to the top, you can sleep to the middle.
Right. Okay.
And I sleep your way to the middle, and I thought that was quite interesting in the sense that with Frankie. One of the reasons, she was 35 when she joined the business, 34. She'll correct me. Might even be 33. But she had served her time. She'd worked in newspapers, radio, television, because, yes, she came into the business as my daughter, and you again, to get back to the skeletons in the cupboard, you can't pretend she isn't.
No.
You can't pretend that Connie...
Got the same surname to give away.
And all that. Albeit Frankie's name is Frankie Fisher, because she's married. Mm-hmm. But in telly, she kept her maiden name. And, you again, it goes back to networking. You're either bold about it, and call her Frankie Peck, or you could call her Frankie Fisher, and then in a meeting, when it was appropriate, you could say, by the way, Frankie's my daughter. Mm. But we took the decision that would be full front. She's joining the business from the BBC, and that's that. Yeah. So, but she came in on the basis of being hugely experienced, as opposed to, I wanted to avoid the Nepo kids thing. So I agree with our best friend Martin. You can open the door, but if they don't swim, they sink.
Absolutely. Interestingly, a lot of our clients are SME businesses, and they're often owner-managed, but often family-run businesses. And I think, from time to time about boards of various businesses that we work with where all of the board members are family. And I think then about, how does Christmas play out? Do they all have a board meeting around the Christmas table and those sorts of things? But big or small, you look at Rupert Murdoch and all the stuff that he's doing with his children, and how the inheritance is going to go with that business will be an interesting one to reflect on. So they do definitely have their own challenges, don't they?
And I think it does. I spoke to, Frankie is on holiday right now. And on Friday, her parting words were, "Don't ring me."
Right.
Yeah. And of course, I had to ring her because her grandma's just died.
Right, yes.
Yeah. So I rang her. I said, "Mary's dead." And again, you see, she calls my mum Mary, as I call my mum Mary. Yeah. I call her mum often, but it's weird how that sort of passes down. And then she said, blah, blah, blah. "By the way, did you do the Instavolt thing? Did you do this? Did you do that?" I said, "You told me not to mention work." Yeah. She said, "I told you not to mention work, but I can mention work."
Well, you need to know what the rules of the game are, that's for sure.
Yeah. But it is challenging employing one of your family. But it's also the shared experience, isn't it? It's utterly sensational.
Yes, indeed. And when people pass nice comments or give good feedback, you're always proud of your team when that happens. But when it's your own, it's even more special, isn't it?
Yeah. And the fact that Frankie can do it. Yeah. And in some ways better than me. Which is such a relief.
Goal of any parent, I think, isn't it, is to bring your children up so that they are able to then excel beyond what you've achieved.
Well, that's right, yeah.
Oh, one last topic then, if we may. Looking on your LinkedIn posts earlier today before our conversation, I see you were involved in a resettlement fair at Guy's Marsh Prison in Shaftesbury. And obviously we've got the new government, we've got the CEO of Timpson's, who's been appointed as a prisons minister because of his involvement with recruitment of ex-offenders and his work as a sort of prison reform trustee. I just wondered if you think there's a sector that is ideally suited to recruiting ex-offenders or what you gained from that experience.
Okay, I've always been keen on the penal system. I'm going to sound like a real geek now, but why not? In very idle moments, I might have seen, On Death Row, a documentary. And then you can go on the website and then you can get to, Death Row in St. Quentin and you can apply to watch a death.
Okay, and have you done
online? That? You can apply I'd like to do that. Yeah, like a sort of being a jury person. Yeah, to witness it. And no, I haven't applied.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, because San Quentin, as you may know, is north of San Francisco. But, and it's quite a jaunt for that. Would I be curious? For sure. Yeah. Because when people talk about being ghoulish and all those things, the fact of the matter is the most watched stuff on television in the cinemas often true crime. Yeah. Or crime. Or, Silence of the Lambs was about a serial killer, not the kind of stuff that you'd read your kids at bedtime.
Right, yeah.
So, when people say to me, "You're weird," I say, not at all. I'm probably one of many who has an interest in this kind of stuff. My daughter, Alex, my eldest daughter, listens to Murderers Are Us or something. Two females in America and talk about murders. Right. Which is both
I'll add
hilarious.
It to my list for the...
No, you must. Yeah, it's sensational. Very funny. So I've filmed in prison, in Kingston Prison in Portsmouth, now shut down, I'm not sure. And I was given this opportunity by a professional mate of mine. So we had a look, and he wanted us to do something on LinkedIn and publicise it, which we did. And, it has a fascination. It has a fascination.
What is it that fascinates you? Is it the backstory of the individuals that are there? Or is
I think it's, to some extent, there for the grace of God. Right. And what I mean by that, I think particularly maybe driving offences. Right. Where somebody in a momentarily lapse has done something horrible that they will never forgive themselves for, and they've killed somebody. Yeah. And we all joke, don't we? Would you rob a bank? Certainly when I was a kid, when there was no CCTV, would you rob a bank? And it's like, yeah, but only for 10 million. I wouldn't be interested in $5,000. If they're going to catch me, it might as well be in Rio.
I'm going to be the great train robber.
Exactly. That kind of Robin Hood type thing. But when like we did, in the Devon prison or Dorset, you met, well, they were all men. It was a men's prison. 560 men locked up, desolate, just wandering around aimlessly. You might call it a tinderbox, but we're pretty calm and low grade in the sense of not category C, like Gartree in Leicestershire, terrorists and stuff. And they're all pretty benign and had lost their way and, weren't evil. Timson's, as I'm sure you know, a lot of their little kiosks are manned or womaned by ex-inmates, ex-prisoners, offenders. And I suppose that's a good environment in the sense that they're by themselves interacting with the public and it's self-contained and arguably easy to manage. But, I was reading, they're going to reduce sentences and so on, I think. And, the truth of it is we have to be able to forgive as a society and get people integrated back into life. Now, it all boils down to other people react. Could I, employ an ex-offender? I guess the first thing is, what have they offended? What was their crime? You've got to weigh up how other people might work to that. But I think if you've got a big company with lots of processes, lots of checks and balances, I think it probably works better there. But I think we've slowly got to come round to the fact that they've served their time. So let's try and integrate them. And do you know what? I've had a client who's been sent down.
Right.
I won't name him. And, wrote to him in prison. And he came out and he's got on with his life. I've known 2 or 3 people who've been to prison and have come out. Often they come out, of course, and become self-employed.
Yes.
So you'd be staggered. You'd be staggered how many people in your day-to-day life have been to prison and come out.
And from a PR perspective, there is a story to be told there. I mean, Timpson's clearly don't hide the fact that they recruit people. It's one of their strategies. It's one of the things they specifically promote. So it's how, so long as you've weighed it up and you've thought about how it applies in your business and you've thought about your checks and balances, there's a story to be told, I guess.
But, there's no doubt, and I embrace it. Things have changed. And things have changed hugely since COVID. It's not sort of rock and roll, but the canvas is much broader and larger these days. Certainly 10 years ago, I'm working from home today, get an email, at 9 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes there's a polite, is that okay? And of course, as an employer, of course it's okay. Yeah. And of course, COVID has proved that all shapes and sizes and temperaments, they can work from home and do a great job. And is society happy for it? Now, there's another topic.
I think we might have to leave that for the next podcast, Lee. That could be a conversation that ran and ran, I'm sure. Yeah. So before we wrap up, any sort of final words of wisdom or tips for our audience? They tend to be business people and HR managers, that sort of thing. Any pearls of wisdom you want to share with our audience?
I guess 2 or 3 things, really. Whoever said just go for it, I set out at 10, wanting to get on network TV, and I did audition in Hollywood. And have I got any special skills? I don't think so, but I'm driven.
Yeah.
I'm driven.
Where does that come from, do you think?
Desperation.
Okay.
And I can answer that very quickly. My upbringing was terribly, lots of love from these women around me, my mum and grands, but it was terribly bleak. Yeah. And I remember them all working really hard, and everybody around me in the council estate working hard. And I fought very, I equate it to going to the moon, in the sense to get out of that gravitational pull of poverty took an enormous effort.
What would the alternative to television have been? What if you'd stayed in Scarborough? Well,
I was working on a pig farm.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And some will say, was television much different? but I would say yes. So I was working on a pig farm, getting up at 5 a.m, mucking the pigs out in all kinds of weather. I'll keep it clean. The weather in Scarborough, everywhere in England, is not good. And it was hard work. And that made me terribly resilient. So I've got to do a 12-hour day typing stuff.
Yeah.
So
life could be worse.
Yeah. So look, seize your opportunities. There was a great final thing, Unipart. You may remember Unipart. Mm-hmm. They were Parts division of British Leyland in the 80s. I've lived my motto really by their slogan, which was this: the answer's yes. Now what's the question? There you
go. Well, the question that you've now got, you might have seen this on our podcast before, is we always end with an audience-sourced question. And your question is here in the envelope, Lee. So,
okay, what's the number one thing on your bucket list and what are you doing about it? That's a great question. And another thing, always give yourself 30 seconds thinking time. If you make it to heaven, what do you expect God to say when you get there? Okay, the God thing first. Christ, you got away with that, mate. I think they never found you out. I think that's probably it.
Do you think God would start?
Have I just got a bleep? I'm sorry. I use that as the vernacular rather than any blasphemy. What's the number thing on your bucket list? Wow, the number one thing on my bucket list. I haven't yet got there. There's a few things on my bucket list, one of which I did two Sundays ago, so Abba Voyage.
Oh, yes.
Sensational. I've been to Vegas, I've been around the world. I've had a great life, If I hadn't have done what I would have done, I'd have said to get on TV. Getting on television was my bucket list item at 10.
Right.
So I guess I did that at 10, or thought about it. And for the rest of it, another bucket list was Frankie working in the business.
Well, there you go. So beginning in the, well, I would say end, but we're not at the end yet, but the up-to-date position is either end of bookends of your bucket list.
Yeah, so that's it, basically.
That's it. Yeah. Well, terrific. Thank you so much for joining us.
That was
today.
great.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
What's interesting about doing something like this is it forces you to reflect, because so many times in life we dash from event to event, don't we? Or family thing to family thing. And then when you take a moment, you just watch the telly. So, fingers crossed, and here's to the next 500 years.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. I hope you found it insightful and empowering. To stay connected, why not hit the subscribe button? Or if you think your friends might be interested, why not rate us as a 5? To be first to know about upcoming episodes, follow us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram and LinkedIn, where you'll find us at Warner Goodman LLP, or follow us on YouTube, where our episodes are at Piece of Pod. Thank you again. Until next time.